All right. Well, I have a question.
Have you ever wondered what was the importance of having secondary characters in your stories, in your illustrations or comics? I'm here to talk about the reasons why secondary characters are really, really important. And even if you have just a main protagonist through most of your stories, you want to include secondary characters and how some of these tips can really help you to do that effectively. So I'm going to share my screen. Awesome. And we're going to open up let me see if I can move that out of the way, move my face out of the way. And I'm going to be painting as we talk about secondary characters. So again, I have made a protagonist actually out of a secondary character. Bendelli here, who is this character right here, is the brother of my main character in JD's story. So he is JD's little brother, and he's a big part of that story. And I'm giving him his own little story as I do some of these illustrations, which are preparation for an animation that I'm creating starring him. And in the meantime, he has lots of secondary characters next to him, which are his friends, and they all have different personalities. And it's so important to have different personalities because my first tip in giving secondary characters and why we need them is they give context to your protagonist. They give context to your protagonist's personality. They let you know the type of person they are because no one is an island. No one is really, um, you know, out there living their life completely alone. Even people who do live in, like I've seen that show. What is it called? Uh, something, some life. Life below zero. And, people are basically isolated, but even still, they're interacting. They have somebody, maybe one person in their life, and they're interacting with animals and they're interacting with nature, which can actually be another character too. So no one is completely an island, but the way that you see them act with these secondary characters really tells you a lot about who they are. It helps you to understand. This is not the color I was looking for. This. Okay, it helps you to really understand, like, who is this person, because if somebody says something to your protagonist and all of a sudden they get really angry, or they might like isolate, or they might even get really sad, it tells you about this person by the way that they're responding to other people, by the way that they interact with other people. It tells you a lot about who this character is, the types of things that trigger them, because don't we all have triggers? It tells you about the types of things that are important to them. So they might interact in certain types of relationships in different ways than others. It's really going to teach your audience who this person is by the way that they respond to other characters. You might think that a character is really nice. As soon as you meet them, they might be smiling, they might be watering a plant, but then all of a sudden they get in their car and they're cut off in traffic and you see a whole other side of them. But that person in that other car is another character. That's somebody else. That's someone that they're interacting with. This is really important to see your character, how they respond to other people, how they respond to life situations that are brought about by other people. Because really, I mean, how many of us have things happen in our life and it doesn't have anything to do with other people? Usually it's the result of somebody else, um, for good or for better or for worse. It's the result of someone else that's interacting with us in some way. Sometimes, and I know that I've done this, you can be sensitive to certain situations. You can take things personally. So it's good to know, like, what are the things that might make your character respond, for better or for worse, if they are entering into a situation that's really, really challenging. Maybe someone did something terrible to them or hurt them, and they respond really calmly and gently, then that's a really big insight to who that character is. Obviously, they're very patient. Obviously, they have a very Zen quality about them, but you never really know who they are truly until you see them interacting with other people. So that's really, really important is for us to see like who this person really is by seeing how they respond to other people. The second thing is the frame of reference and the validation for the audience's emotional response. So that's really important. Like your secondary characters will often be the ones that kind of give you an insight into reality. They kind of validate your audience's feelings because so much of the time, your character is your protagonist character. When I say character, I'm pretty much preferring to your protagonist character, but your protagonist is going to be mostly like oftentimes a little bit, ah, what's the word? In their own world, they're going to be kind of unrealistic a lot of times. They might have this overly optimistic view of life. I've noticed that more and more as I started to do like character breakdowns into like types of archetypes. And I realized a lot of protagonists have kind of like rose tinted glasses. A lot of protagonists are like I mean, it's great to be optimistic, but I think when you really see protagonists, a lot of times, usually, especially in TV series, they're very, very optimistic, and we don't really get that kind of our what we normally think. I mean, most of us hopefully are not pessimistic, but I think a lot of us are skeptical, especially in different types of situations. We've all experienced what it feels like to be hurt and so we all have a little bit of caution, and sometimes that secondary character can add that kind of voice of reason or like kind of like even a little bit of pessimism to kind of balance things out. You see that very clearly in SpongeBob. SpongeBob SquarePants is obviously he's super optimist. A lot of protagonists are, but he's like the ideal, I think. And you really see that he's, looking at life in one way, and then you get a character like Squidward who's coming in and he's completely the opposite. It's like does life doesn't work that way, and really kind of even though his pessimism is more than anyone would aspire to be, it's kind of like a nice little validation to or a nice balance to have someone that's kind of like, you know, as opposed to this overly, like, no, I won't call SpongeBob overly optimistic, but very, very optimistic character on one hand, and then you have the character on the other hand who's just balances that out. Even if it is with a negative attitude, it still makes us kind of go, yeah, I know somebody who does that, or I know that life has moments where you feel like that, where you feel like, oh, this is never going to work. Or you have those moments, and having those characters actually say those things can really feel like a bit of a relief for your audience because they don't feel like they're the only ones who notice that this is probably not a good idea. When your protagonist goes off to save the world with little to no plans at all. Okay, the third thing that secondary characters add is they provide comedic relief. And that is exactly why one of the great things that I really love about Bandelli, because he was really a comedic relief in, or is, because the series is still ongoing. He provides a lot of comedic relief. Especially in the early parts. Second, when it gets into like the fourth book, not so much. It gets more serious. But the first to the third book, he does provide some comedic relief because he has that personality. He's like he likes to joke around, he likes to have fun, and especially if you're telling a serious story that might be a lot of drama, uh, having that secondary character, I feel like, because your protagonist might be going something through something that's really hard. They might be experiencing a lot of emotions. And this is more with series, with series and maybe with dramas that you might see on television where your protagonist is not the wide-eyed optimist, but your protagonist is actually someone who's a little bit more contemplated. Maybe they're going through a tough situation in life. A lot of dramas, that is the core of the story is what the protagonist is going through, and it's not an easy thing. But having a secondary character who's a little bit more relaxed, maybe they might be going through something too, but at least uh on the overall story, they're more like a comedic relief. They're not, oops, get a little bit. Providing more of this comedic type of relief, and it's not so it makes it a little bit more digestible, especially if you have a lot of drama, or even like a horror movie, you have like a lot of drama or even scary things happening. And then all of a sudden you have this secondary character and it just says something that kind of lightens the mood a bit, kind of makes it a little bit easier to digest what's happening. Um, what's that show that I've been watching lately? It's called It's called The Pit. That movie about that series is about like the ER. I'm not a really big fan of doctors. I'm sorry. I have a lot of doctors in my family, and I don't know. I'm not a big fan of doctors, but I got into that series, and anyway, I thought, it's very true that that's a drama and a lot of the characters are serious, but you have like these little moments, these little pockets of comedic relief, and it is primarily by the secondary characters because the main guy is, he's not like a super serious guy. He's a leader. He's in a leadership position. And he does have to kind of set the tone for the whole place. But you'll see like there's moments where that lady, I don't know what her name is, when she got punched. It was like not good when she got punched, but there were like moments where she um, was just kind of, offering some comedic relief, like adding little one-line zingers and stuff like that. And that's what they can do sometimes. They don't have to be like a clown. They can sometimes just offer like a little one-liner that's kind of funny. They had someone coming in too that was just like the funny doctor. I don't remember what they called him, but he had a whole bunch of dad jokes. And what they said about him is the same thing that is true in film. It's just like they were saying, like, this is a hard job essentially. So we need, he feels like it's um his mission to kind of lighten the space. And that's exactly what characters do, secondary characters can do in in a film, in a gaming atmosphere. Like you have some character like look when you look at characters like Donkey in Shrek, characters like even in video games, like you'll see characters like Yoshi in Mario, or even Toad, maybe you might consider one of the secondary characters that just kind of adds a little bit of light to some drama that's happening. Because even in a video game like Mario, there's still drama. There's still a princess that was kidnapped. It's cute and it's fun, but you're still dealing with something that's hard. So having like cute characters, silly characters, fun characters that are just kind of the little comedic relief, or just something that lightens the mood can really, really add a lot to your story. And I will never forget character designer that I actually interviewed very recently. If you haven't seen it yet, I have a second YouTube channel. It's called Sankofa Animation Network. And on there, I'm sharing the interviews that I'm doing with people that are in the animation industry and people that are in the space of faith-centered storytelling, which is a big part of what Sankofa Animation Network is, and as well as promoting diversity and diverse storytelling within the animation and entrepreneurial space. So there's a lot going on there. I think it'd be great if you want to check that out. I just did an interview with Dan Haskett. He's an amazing, incredible animator who's been in the industry for over 50 years. He's been in it for a very, very long time. But one of the things that he taught me, he actually did a workshop while I was in college. This was like 20 years ago, but he did a workshop. That's how we met at my college, and it was a character design workshop. And one of the things that he taught was essentially that a lot of the most successful characters are the ones that you want to hug. And I never ever forgot that. It really stood out to me. It really made me think about the types of huggable type characters. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be the protagonist. Sometimes it's just a secondary character that's just has that quality of like they're just charming. And you might have, I don't know if you might have already seen this movie, is really popular. I saw it. It was Mandalorian and Grogu. And the Grogu character is exactly like that's exactly what he was talking about. You know, having these kind of characters, even though Grogu is a secondary character. I was thinking about drawing him too for this episode, but I wanted to work on this. Um, it's a secondary character, but it adds that element of lightness. It adds the element of just charm. And I think that's a part of your story. Even when it's not your protagonist, it can still add a lot to your story. So that's just something to keep in mind and not forget those types of those types of elements to add into your character designs. Think about your secondary characters and what they can add, what they can contribute to your story using some of these techniques. All right, so the first one I had was it gives context to your protagonist personality, and then it gives a frame of reference and validation for your audience and their emotional response. The third thing was the comedic relief. Fourth is it's a B story. So it stretches time whenever you're trying to take a, oh boy, this is so true. When you're trying to tell a story and you might know the beginning and the climax and the resolution, but you have a lot of things that you're like, oh, I don't know how to feel this time. I'm not sure what to do. And B's and secondary characters are great for including and incorporating a B story. So what even is a B story? It's a story that has nothing to do, well, nothing directly to do with the it does affect the protagonist, but it's not directly involving the protagonist. It's involving directly a secondary character. So I love the way that George R. R. Martin does this because he has like a B through C story in in Game of Thrones. If you ever watch those series, there's always the other character's perspective, and sometimes they'll line up, and sometimes they'll have something to do with it. But oftentimes it's just letting you know who that secondary character is a little bit more. It's getting us more invested, and I think that's exactly the point. It gets you more invested in the secondary characters. And it's really important because when you're more invested, you're more engaged and you care more about how those secondary characters interact with your protagonist. It makes you have more feelings when you see them on scene with your protagonist. When you see Cersei, right? And you see in Game of Thrones, for example, and I don't know if anyone still watches that show. I still love it. It's still one of my all-time favorite series. But when you see um, how she's treated by her husband, and which is, when before King Robert dies, sorry if that's a spoiler, but when you see the way she kind of becomes very meek and almost like docile and insecure around her husband, It really makes you think differently about her. It gives another layer to her, even though you know that she's really cold-hearted, right? She's cold-hearted and she's not nice. It gives you a little bit more context to maybe just why that she is like a woman, just like any other woman, and she has feelings, and you can tell that she's been very much broken by this man. Like she had, and it does go into like um, why? Because she's like she talks about, you know, the hope that she had when she was married and she wanted it to be like a real marriage, but it just turned out that he was never really serious about her or the marriage. He was just kind of doing it out of his own duty and essentially he did nothing more than cheat on her the whole time. It's but even though it's like, oh, this is, maybe she kind of deserves it because she's really cold-hearted. It also, it's just like, wow, I kind of can see why she's become so cold. I can see um, why this character is now responding this way. I can see that she had hopes for one thing and it didn't turn out that way over and over again. And so maybe sleeping with her brother wasn't the best solution, but that was her solution. It does make the whole story a lot more interesting and does make the whole story a lot more engaging. And when we do see her interact with the protagonist, I think there's more than one. I think that both Jon Snow and Daenerys are both the protagonists. Even though Jon Snow is the main one, I still think that man, I just I just feel that like, so much of the time I was rooting for Daenerys for a good portion of that. But, it didn't, there was always one protagonist, but you can fool your audience to make it feel like I feel like that's another level. When you can fool your audience to make you feel like one person is the protagonist when it's really another. That is really B story because they were the B story and you didn't even realize they were the B story until they died. And you're like, "Oh, I thought you were part of the ending. No, you are the ending. It was really all about this other character the whole time." That's another level of storytelling that a lot of us, will aspire to get to at some point. I think I'm putting too much detail in this. I don't want to over render this. So let me see what I can do to kind of break this up. I've done that before where I've like over rendered stuff. And it's like, no, it just makes you take way too long. So I think I'm going to speed this process up a little bit. But we've done four reasons so far about secondary characters, giving context to your protagonist, frame of reference and validation for your audience, providing comedic relief, adding a B story, and the fifth one is the relationships produce drama, and drama is entertaining. Drama is why we watch the stories in the first place, is it not? I mean, we want to be entertained. We want something to happen that's going to give us like wow, an insight. We're going to be like, wow, this is really getting good. I think what does this really well is like soap operas. I don't watch soap operas, but I remember when I was growing up, my grandmother used to really love those. And there was one I think I watched in high school, but other than that, I've never been a but I know I've seen like enough of them to know that like, oh, there's a lot of drama happening in between these characters. And every drama does that, not just soap operas. I think soap operas probably do it more. They do it probably better in some instances. But it's really good to note that, you want to add drama. You need drama. Even the most basic storytelling, you need drama. You need to have something happening that's going to make your audience care. And the only way to care is to really show these characters in different scenarios, show them interacting with each other, how they're responding. Like, come on, when you see like a protagonist and you really start to root for them and you see them interact with somebody that does them really wrong, doesn't it just really get to you on a personal level? You're like, oh, I hate that person, even though they're a fictional character. I mean, the guy in Game of Thrones who played Joffrey, he quit acting because people were so mean to him for his role, but he was just really being a good actor. But that's how invested people get in storytelling. They get so invested that they don't even realize that it's just all acting and somebody wrote this down on a paper. They wrote it down like, on the computer, and it's not a real story. It's a fiction. It's a fiction, people, but people get so invested because the drama is entertaining. And you can add elements like that. You can add elements where your character is really experience a lot of strife with another character. Like they might be really at odds with a secondary character, and it might be hard to even watch. Um, what was the ones that were really uh, what's the name of that one villain? There was a really, really bad villain in Game of Thrones that was torturing that guy who was known as I keep saying that guy. He was torturing uh the guy who he was calling Reek. You guys remember that? And he was just so mean to this guy. He tortured him in all kinds of ways that I wouldn't even want to recall here. But even though that was, hard to watch, you still watched it, and I still watched it. It's still like, oh man, what's gonna happen? Is he ever going to get out of this situation? You at some point when it's so bad, you're like, I hope he just, ends it for him because it's getting like really too much. It's too much to even watch. But all of that is engaging. So you don't have to make torture scenes, but you can make your stories engaging by the way that characters respond to each other, by creating that drama between two characters and how they interact with each other. You can create uh, these difficult relationships that, sometimes it's like, man, I really wish these characters would finally admit that they love each other. That you see that a lot. The will they, won't they type of thing. And I think they keep repeating it almost too much in that series, Abbott Elementary. They keep going like, will they finally stay together, be together? But does secondary character, love interests are secondary characters falling in love with the protagonist. So I think that you really, really need to incorporate. A lot of stories don't have love interest. I think just about every story can have a love interest. Um, even if it's like not necessarily like serious love, it can just be like puppy love, or it can be like two secondary characters falling in love. I think there's ways to do that with just about every story, and I just think it really adds a lot to it. So you want to think about those things when you're incorporating your storytelling. Sorry, my hand is getting so close to the camera. It really, all of those things are really important. So just incorporating those is going to make a big difference for you. So I know I said a lot here, but I think I'm going to just about end it here. I think we've gotten a lot said and done, and I'm going to just go ahead and finish this illustration. I'm going to have to just do it, do it quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on this piece, so I'm going to try and get through it faster and just get the details in. Okay, so all right, let me shut that. All right, well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a great session talking about secondary characters. And I really hope that you start to think more about the types of characters that you incorporate, how they interact with your protagonists, how they interact with each other, because they can be two secondary characters, can be love interests, and you can just kind of just add to the engagement. So remember, I'll say this one more time. The steps that we did was they give context. The things that secondary characters do is they give context, is the first one. The second one is they provide the frame of reference and validation for your audience. Third is they provide comedic relief. Fourth is they create a B story, which can allow you to add time to your story. If you're missing, you don't know what scenes to add, having your secondary characters can give you the opportunity for a B story. And finally, the relationships increase drama, and we all love drama, don't we? Okay, well, until I see you next time, be grateful, live balanced, and be yourself. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.